Alrighty, so these are the parts for that scarf ring, going to be around both the forward and the rear gunner's position. There's three parts. They are onto about 1/32 balsa and cut out, and then there's a couple of wooden pieces that are two pieces of paper that are folded over and glued together. They go right there on that front part, and we'll show you how those go on in a second. I think those are mounts for, I think, what's going to be a gun sight. Anyway, initially you can see that hatched area around there and then black edging. That hatched area, the skinnier, slightly smaller diameter ring goes in there as a spacer. So I'm just going to put a little glue on there and then drop the spacer on there and just make sure it's straight. This glue, again, is very forgiving because you can move things around for a bit. It doesn't glue instantaneously, but it gives a nice, good, solid adhesion when it's ready, when it's done. Just make sure that's even, and then put some glue around that piece. Once it's dry a little bit, maybe. Put some glue around that piece, the spacer, and then you put the other little guy, the other top ring on top of that one. And that one, you'll notice, has a couple of white parts on it that are areas where you're going to end up putting the scarf mount. You can see it's underneath there where I'm going to start building it at some point. I've coated these with a little bit of silver Sharpie, and then I ended up putting a little black Sharpie over that to dull it down because I think it looked a little too gaudy. But those little white parts on the edge, that's where you're going to end up putting the actual Lewis guns. And then here are these little pieces. You can see how thick they are. They're just two pieces of paper, sandwich rolled, or folded, embossed, and then folded. And then they go right up front here. There's a couple dotted lines. Hopefully you can see them, little dashed lines right on those little panes of the windows. And those little white dots on top, those are going to be places where some wire is going to go. And it also makes a little trapeze and attaches in between those pieces I just put on. And I'm not sure, but I think that's a bomb sight, I think. So there's two of them, one on each side. And I'll put that bomb sight thing. I'll do that later because that'll fall off for dang sure by the time I'm done doing all this stuff. But every little bit counts, and there, that piece is going to go on there. And ultimately, I did glue it on just by eye like that. And it looks very good, and it does kind of hide a multitude of sins. Again, that's supposed to be around the cockpit, but it isn't. But it looked okay. It does not look bad at all. I'm pretty pleased. Alrighty, now, since I didn't show you this, but there's a bunch of doodads. These little fairings go over various places. And then these are little rolled circles, half circles, that go. It's where some guide wires are going to go for the elevator and rudder controls. So they emanate from those half pieces that are rolled over, and then they go through those. And there's some more of those little rings on the rear fuselage as well. So I just put all those on. Again, they're probably dumb to put them on now. There's 4 on each side. I guess 8. 4 in the back, 4 in the front, and on each side. I'm hoping I'm going to remember these things are there and not run into them. But you know what'll happen. There's also windshields that go on there. But this is a little hump that's right there. Now, I don't know if it's supposed to be in the dead center as it's printed or if it's supposed to be over the pilot. I'm not sure. But a fuel line goes into it. But this is what it looks like. You can see it's a pedal-like design because it's a curve, and it has to roll in 2 ways. So these are usually my nemesis, and so they're very difficult to do, at least in my estimation. But if you roll it and it works, it goes right there. And then, like I said, there's a hole in it that's going to have a fuel line going in. Now, that piece is supposed to go in this inside, and there's even a little hole. There's a little tiny divot there. That's where a hole is, and this would match up and fold and be in there. And it's supposed to make it so those pieces come together and you don't have to edge glue them. I didn't use it. I thought if I roll this correctly and edge glue things, it should be fine. It's not a structural component. So anyway, I use these little dabbing tools. And that thing I'm working on is a little squishy board that's used for, my wife uses them for blocking knitting projects. But they're a perfect consistency to push down. They're kind of the consistency of a hard eraser, a soft eraser kind of, I guess a hard eraser. But you can see as you took those dabbing tools of the right size and I just roll them along there, You could use a cake decorating tool. I know that if you can't find these things, I know that Neil over at Neil's Paper Models, he uses cake decorating tools. Anything with a round edge on it, a round tip, that can allow you to sort of, as you hit the paper like this, it starts to make it fold. You can see it's rolling right now on its own. So I did this little bit, and I wanted to show this sort of in its entirety, because this is hard for me to do, so I didn't do much editing here on purpose. The front end rolls up like that, and there's a couple of flaps that will glue in, and then we'll glue each of these pieces in turn to each other. And I don't really go through the whole thing for you, don't worry, but I go through the front and the back, but you can see where those are going to come together. And at this point, I'm checking these, and I'm amazed that they're actually looking pretty good. And this thing is going to look like a little potato bug when it's done, but the idea is to not have horrible, ugly, overlapping seams. It's going to have lines on it. It's a paper model, and that's fine. Ordinarily, if I had something like this, I would fill it in and paint it, and then it would look solid, but I didn't want to this time. I wanted to use the kit part. So here I am with a slightly smaller dabbing tool, trying to get a couple more, just kind of fine-tuning a couple of the curves, and that just is kind of by eye. And then I take my tweezers and I start to test fit things, and lo and behold, I was kind of surprised, especially when the camera's rolling. I rolled these around, and they're going to touch that base and look actually good. It's hard to see with my fat fingers in the way, but I think if you just kind of watch this, you'll get a feel for what it involves. It's just a lot of patience more than anything else, and you end up gluing each thing very slowly and methodically. So that end's going to go fold up in there. And what I did was I ended up gluing the front end and the back end on, and then very slowly taking each petal and gluing only one side and the center together and folding them together very carefully with the tweezers and holding them with between my thumb and my forefinger and gluing them. And with that glue, it dries fast and you can hold the shape. So here I'm starting to get the ends glued on the rear end of this thing. And again, I already know it sort of fits because the paper's already rolled, but you can see I physically roll it over and make it touch. And then you can see my finger kind of holding it in place. And I fold them both over, and then I kind of hold it, and I'm kind of squeezing, kind of being delicate. You gotta have delicate fingers for this because you'll crush the model. Because this, again, is just tiny, thin little paper. But I'm trying to put enough pressure on it to sort of make it pucker and give it the shape I want it to have. If I hold it long enough, it dries. And then I came in from that side to do the back end, and ended up doing the same thing, holding it together, and now I'm squeezing it very, very carefully to get that center spine glued in place. And you can see a little white there at the seam, but that's okay. We're going to paint stuff later. It still looks worlds better than stuff I've done in the past. This one actually turned out really well. I'm quite chuffed by this piece because it did work. But all I ended up doing now is going around each one individually and gluing them in, one little petal at a time. In retrospect, I should have left the front end probably off because it might have been easier to then put some glue underneath, like throw it like I did with that rear piece along the whole spine and stuff. But I didn't. I ended up putting this piece together because I wanted to give it some shape on either end, and it worked out. So I put some glue on the tabs, and then I put some glue on the very edges where the edge gluing is going to go, along those edges, and I think along the ultimately, yes, along the center where the spine is, because those are all places going to go. But don't put any more glue on than that, or any more places, because you really have to just focus on one little leaf at a time. Don't try to put 3 of them in at once or something, because at least in my estimation, it will never work. So fold these in, get those started, squeeze them together like that, and then once you get those moving, then you slowly, just like the rear end, pull these things over. And if I had colored the edges, you wouldn't see as much white as you are now, but that's okay. And see my forefinger is kind of pushing down and my thumb is pushing up. And I'm trying to basically keep all edges of that thing kind of in contact with the glue. And notice as you do that, and you're being very delicate here, light touch is what you got to use. And the glue ends up holding it in place. And the glue also acts as a little bit of a filler, as I've found. This tacky glue is amazing stuff. I really do like using it. course, I never used any other glue for these, so I'm used to it. But here I'm just trying to be very careful and very methodical and making sure that I'm getting something. And you hold it for a while, hold it longer than you think you need to, and look at that. It actually starts to hold together. So now my front and my rear are done, and that gives me the basis for the rest. So I won't show you putting each individual piece on the rest, but you can see what I'm going to do. And I start on one end, and I just slowly put in enough glue to hit the seams along there and on the spine, and I literally put each one in individually with the tweezers. That thing I never used. I couldn't figure out how to use it to make it actually work easily. To me, it was just a detriment because, again, it's not something that's going to be holding anything important. So just basically each one of these little guys, you start folding it together and gluing it individually. And if you just take it slow, and it's already kind of shaped, it already has a nice shape. When I was done with this, what I ended up doing was mixing a little bit of paint and painting my seams. But there's only one of these out of all those little sections that is a little off kilter. Everything else looked almost Polish. It looked really good. So I was very, very pleased with that, as it turned out. So here it is done. Again, cheating here, but finished, and I actually painted the edges a little bit. And you can see how they look. Those lines are normal, but the white is gone because I painted those a little bit up with paint. And then I made sure I put a little pencil in there to make that hole, make sure it's clean, because that's where my fuel line, I think it's a fuel line, is going to go. And that's just going to glue right on there to the spine. So that's going to look really good. So what I do is put some glue on here, make sure there's enough of it. And again, if something you have to touch up, like with some white showing somewhere, like on this one, I think there's a little white on the edge, I'll go back with a little paint. And even if it's not perfectly matched to this chocolate brownish green PC10, I think it was called, color, it'll be good enough to make it look hidden. But you just sort of put it on and squeeze it down. And again, you can see the lines. This is how like wheel spats are made on Stukas or something, the same kind of thing. But they don't look bad once they're done. On a Stuka, I would definitely be tempted to fill it in and everything. But on this one, I didn't want to. I wanted to just leave it as is and make it like a real paper model. And I actually like the way it turned out. Those pieces there are going to be where some engine nacelle kinds of supports go. But there's the front end basically done. It needs a windscreens and a scarf mount, and that's it. So I bit the bullet and decided I'm going to go ahead and try to put this sucker together. And you can see there's a couple of toothpicks. I put those in that very edge and glued them in and put corresponding holes in the back side, there and there. And I also sanded with a block sander that flat edge because if I did it enough, I got a pretty good seam. Now there's still going to be a little bit of a gap there. Again, not a non-Polish gap. Pretty good, but not as good as it should be. But it's the best I could get it. So I'm probably going to end up taking a very fine, thin piece of paper and put it all the way around those seams to kind of hide it. Now, I have found when I butt join, if I use the tacky glue, it doesn't work as well. It tends to undo and kind of get saggy while it's drying. It'd be fine if it was dry, but I tend to use super glue for this. I'm putting quite a bit on. I actually put on too much in this case because some of it's splooged out. But the danger here is that you got to do it right the first time. But I have test fit this 16 trillion times, and that right there is straight and good. Tail's going to end up looking pretty straight and all the rest. Now I spend the rest of my time just making sure it's good and kind of trying to push pressure on it. You can see I can stick my finger inside and push on the bulkhead a little. If you notice my thumb, I'm trying to hold it on part of the body forward that's kind of stable. The underneath is very rickety. Until I put the wing on and put the spars in there, that's just paper folded over. So it's actually kind of wimpy down there. Kind of an odd design, I think, but I'm not the designer. Still going together okay. But that was also the root, I think, of part of my problem of getting my front end kind of questionable. But anyway, this is going to be fine. It goes together, and it's relative. Well, it is pretty dang straight. And I can do a little tweaking when I put the tails on to make it look dead flat, dead straight. But you know, that gap on the camera looks worse than it is actually in real life. But I am going to end up just taking a little piece of this stuff, of the colored paper, and sort of scanning it and cutting a nice, very thin sliver out and putting it around there. I think that'll hide it a little bit more, make it look a little bit nicer. But even as is, it's not horrible. Put a little accelerator in there that'll seep in and help dry everything a little bit quicker, and help it be nice and strong. That stuff evaporates, so the discoloration goes away very quickly. And so really the hard part of this is test fitting and making sure everything is straight and making sure that everything is square. Now, you got to sort of fudge a little bit. It's not going to be as perfect, at least for me, as it maybe could be. Here I'm just making sure, again, the inside bulkheads are kind of holding together a little bit. But I can't get my other finger in the other side to push on them. But I know from test fitting it that they are mated. And so it should be okay. And there she is. Like I said, here's this seam, which is going to get covered up. I was trying not to cover it up, but I'm going to have to. And that's okay. It'll look just fine. But even as is, if I didn't, no one's going to be staring at that anyway. There's so much impressive stuff on this model that your eye will not go to that immediately. But here it is, all together. Hard to believe that was all just flat paper a little while ago. And I'm really liking the way it's coming together. I guess I got to start the tails and the lower wing next. And then it'll start to come together pretty dang fast at that point. Just a bunch of struts. Oh, the tails will look cool.